As of writing this script, 8 out of the 9 episodes of She-Hulk have been released, and I've gotta say, I'm conflicted. Out of the gate, I'll say there are great reviews that highlight the flaws of this show, but they tend to go overboard and end up misrepresenting the show's contents, or at least the ideas behind the writing itself. The same can be said for the positive reviews of this show. I actually agreed with a lot of what other people had to say about the show, but at the same time, they can take everything about this show at face value, which is the only way to actually enjoy what's happening here. First off, I'll say this. The show is a comedy. Comedy is an extremely subjective thing, and I really like comedy. My tastes are definitely not similar to what happens in She-Hulk, though there was at least one time that I actually chuckled at something that was happening in the show. The comedy in the show is a mix of two things, the first being goofy situations and the other being cheap, quick jokes almost as if they were slotted in there to meet a quota of sorts. Before I dig deeper into the comedy, I want to bring up the other aspect of this show, which is the writing, or really just the plot. What a lot of other people don't seem to realize is that this show is really just a sitcom, and it does follow that episodic format. That's not a bad thing, that's what they want to do, so they should be able to do that. The problem is when the show decides they want to do plot, it's convenient, and to put it simply, it's lazy. I'll go over the antagonist side of things now, which mostly occurs later on in the show, which ties back to what I'm mostly conflicted about. This show's best feature is the goofy stuff, the kind of humor or scenes that happen because it's a side of the MCU that we understand normally in a serious way, then making it not serious. And some other characters with superpowers, who are just in a really odd spot. Like that frog superhero guy who was just this insanely goofy character the entire time. What's annoying is that in this next episode, there's some big antagonist faction. It was foreshadowed a few episodes back, but without putting a face on this antagonist, there's no real tension. It's just throwing a bad guy up, which is meant to be taken seriously, though throughout the entire show, nothing's been taken seriously. I do think that there is a massive problem with this show being a sitcom, and has to do with the way they bring in MCU characters who aren't meant for a sitcom, then dumb them down so that they can play a part in the episode. I've personally fallen out of love with cameos, and I don't think a character should be any different when they do appear as a cameo. Here are most of the cameos. Hulk in the show was really boring, and everyone already knows how they've ruined Hulk over the years. They then had Wong, which wasn't a big deal, as they didn't dumb him down too much, and as others have already stated, that's already happened in Doctor Strange 2, which is a fever dream to me. The last real one is Daredevil, which others absolutely hated, but it kind of works for me. Daredevil smashed, and that's hype. And he did a walk of shame, but like it's not really a walk of shame because we all know he was G'd up after that. There's definitely going to be people who aren't as happy about all of these characters appearing, and that's fair. I would have preferred that they didn't use cameos at all, since it's so easy to do and is far too oversaturated these days. So going back over the humour, the cheap parts got a lot smaller as the show went on. Cheap humour always has a place where it can work, but in the later episodes of She-Hulk, the only cheap humour actual scenes are tied to the paralegal character. Nikki's character was the most insufferable character in the entire show. And again, comedy is subjective, so some people might have found it funny, but to me, her eccentric attitude was just too much. It was completely jarring and really annoying. There's a lot of moments where I felt as if the show purposely put in stupid men for the sake of belittling them, but after watching some other videos people have put out, I've realized that there's also a fair amount of male characters that aren't disrespected, and are actually appreciated. There are lines that basically say men suck, but they're just referring to the specific types of guys which do exist in the real world. The show does pander for women, so that's why this isn't a one-off bit, though it might be a cheap gag. It isn't saying that all men are clowns. It does feel awkward for how many times it happens though, which is just another example of the weak comedy in the show. Ultimately, it isn't garbage, but it's definitely mediocre, and best enjoyed when you're not thinking too much about what's happening. Though in my completely biased opinion, it is pretty odd that in every single episode, you're having moments where it's like, men, am I right? Now that I think about it, this entire show can be summed up with, it could have been better. When I saw Josh Segarra's character, I felt betrayed. That actor is goddamn amazing, and yet he plays the most useless character in this show. I guess it's alright since this was basically a meh comedy, but this guy was Prometheus on Arrow. He gave off raw, psychotic acting in that show, and when I saw him again, I just expected him to be giving another incredible performance. I really wanted to end off this video with a final score of sorts for She-Hulk, but I'm far too conflicted to. Of course, I haven't seen the final episode yet, but if I don't add anything else into this video after watching the final episode, then you already know that there wasn't much else to say. The show kind of works as a forgettable, somewhat funny series, but at the same time, I have a feeling the finale will be horrible, which will easily lower the rating. Let's say this, if you were to ask, is the show worth your time, I would say this. The first episode gives off a bad impression, because you're not absorbed into the sitcom vibe yet. The opening shows a lazy narrative and features that horrible scene where she complains about a real problem but undermines the message by comparing herself to someone whose life is easily 10 times worse than hers. After that, the show is better, not by a lot, but that same problem isn't recurring. The MCU went down a different route with this show, though I didn't like it enough to say I want more of it. I prefer if the MCU wasn't a sitcom, since it works best when there's a real, heavy-hitting narrative with just enough light-hearted humor to keep it fun. I love the movies that explored real ideas about the world and formed character development. My favorite MCU movie is easily Captain America 2 and Infinity War. I equally respect this show's attempt to do something new, but it's kind of like that Slipping Jimmy cartoon. It's in a universe with a lot more potential, so why lower your standards for a mindless sitcom when you could have had a legal drama starring She-Hulk, where she actually learns by herself that she needs to be a Hulk as well as a lawyer to fight crime. Maybe it would have been too much like Daredevil, but who can complain about more Daredevil? She-Hulk could have been a show about a woman who was unjustly pushed down by her male co-workers, or held back from advancing in her career due to her gender. There could have been the dilemma of picking between advancing in illegal endeavors or saving people as the She-Hulk. There's only 24 hours in a day. Imagine what trouble she could get into when trying to live those two lifestyles. The Disney show did touch on this, but that's all they did. She-Hulk could have been great had they taken her seriously. But I guess the MCU isn't ready to take itself seriously again. Thanks for watching.